Today we're working on multiplying binomials, and the whole idea with multiplying binomials is you are going to take each term one at a time and you're going to multiply it times each of the terms in the other parentheses, and then as you do that you're going to write it out, and then when you're finished with multiplying every term in one parentheses times every term in the other parentheses, you will just then look to see if you have any like terms, and you're going to combine like terms, and then you'll put it in standard form and everything will be done. Okay, so that's what we're working on, is how do you multiply binomials. All right, so let's do some examples. So notice the way that you know that you're supposed to be multiplying them is, remember, you look between the parentheses, and if there's nothing between them, that means that you're multiplying. And so what you're going to do is you're going to look at how many terms are in one parentheses, because that's going to tell you how many times how many terms you're going to have to take times the other parentheses, okay? And so remember, your terms are separated by your plus and minus signs. And so in this one, we have the term 2x, and then we have the term a positive 3, okay? So we are going to take each one of those one at a time times everything in this other parentheses. So you're going to start with the 2x just because it's first. And so you are going to essentially distribute it like we did before to every term in the other one. And then when you're finished there, you're going to take the 3 and you're going to take it times everything in the other one. Okay, so as you do this, you're just going to write it out. So you're going to take the 2x times the x. And so remember, if you need to write it out to the side to kind of figure out what that is, you can. So the 2 would be, well, that's essentially like a 1 right there. So it'd be 2 times 1, which is 2. And then x times x is x squared. So 2x times x, we get 2x squared. Okay. Then, and actually I'm going to write it down a little bit further so we have room in a minute. So we get 2x squared. And then we have to take the 2x times the 4. So it'd be 2x times 4. So we got 2 times 4. Which is 8, and then x doesn't have anything to multiply with, so it just comes over. So we get an 8x. So as we're doing this, we're going to kind of write it out, and that's a positive 8x, so we have to write our plus and minus signs to separate our terms. So we have a plus 8x there. And now notice we've taken the 2x times everything in this parentheses. So now I have to take the 3, the other term, and distribute it to everything in the other one. So now I'm going to take my 3 and I'm going to multiply it times the x, and then I'm going to multiply it times the 4. So 3 times x gives me 3x. So I'm going to add a 3x to what I already have, and then we do the 3 times the 4, which you probably don't have to write that down, but since I've been writing the rest of them, I'll do that one too, and we get 12. So that would be plus 12. Okay, so that's this first part. You take each term and one at a time and multiply it times each of the terms in the other parentheses, and then after that you're going to look at what you have and you're going to see, do they have or are there any like terms, and then you're going to combine them, and then if it needs to be rewritten in standard form, you do that. So notice that one's not a like term with anything, but this 8x and that 3x are like terms, so we're going to combine those, and then that 12 is just going to come over. Okay, so I'll write my answer over here. So my 2x squared would go first because it has the highest degree with it. And then whenever I take 8x plus 3x, 8 plus 3 is 11, so that'd be 11x, and then that plus 12 just comes over. So that is what you get when you multiply those two binomials. Okay, so that's how this works. You take each term in one binomial times all the terms in the other one. And the reason why these are binomials is because, remember, the prefix bi means 2, and so each of these that we'll be dealing with today will have 2 terms in them. Okay, you can have more than 2 terms, but that's at a later date that you will be doing that. Okay, so let's just practice this. So this one, notice you have this parentheses, there's nothing in between that and the other parentheses, so that means you have to multiply. So you're going to take each term in this one times all the terms in that one, okay? So do it one at a time. So we've got the 6h, and then we have the negative 7. So you start with the 6h, so we're going to take 6h times the 2h, and then 6h times the 3. And so let's go ahead and do that. So we'd have 6h times 2h, so 6 times 2 is 12. And then h times h ends up being h squared. And then 6h times 3, well, 6 times 3 is 18. And then the h doesn't have anything to multiply with, so it just comes over. And then we're done with our 6h because we've distributed it to everything. So now I'm going to take my negative 7 and do the same kind of thing. So it's going to be negative 7 times the 2h, and then negative 7 times the 3. So negative 7 times 2 ends up being a negative 14, and then notice that h just comes down because it doesn't have anything to multiply with. And then we take negative 7 times 3, so negative 7 times 3 ends up being negative 21. Make sure you don't ignore the signs that are in front of these numbers. That's where a mistake is made quite often, okay? And then from there, so we've distributed everything in one parentheses times everything in the other one. Now we look to see, do we have any like terms, and we combine them, okay? So that's not a like term with anything, but this 18h minus the 14h will combine, and then that minus 21 will come over. So the 12h squared just comes over. And then that's essentially a positive 18 minus 14. So we'll get a positive 4h out of it. And then that minus 21 comes over. So there we go. All right. So hopefully you're starting to see how this works. Okay, so if you want to pause it and see if you can do the next one, you can. But I'm going to work it out. So this one, notice between the parentheses there's nothing, so that's what tells me you're multiplying. And so you've got the 5m and the 2 that you're going to distribute one at a time times the everything that's in this parentheses. So start with the 5m. So 5m times 8m, and then we're going to take the 5m times the negative 1. And so 5m times 8m, well, 5 times 8 will be 40, so we get 40, and then m times m. Remember, when you multiply like bases, you add their exponents, so that's where the m squared comes from. And now we take the 5m times the negative 1, so that'd be negative 5m. And so that's everything with the 5m, because we've distributed it to everything. Now we take the 2, so 2 times 8m, and then 2 times negative 1. So 2 times 8m is a positive 16m, and then 2 times negative 1 ends up being negative 2. Okay, so we've distributed. Now we are going to combine like terms. So that 40m squared isn't a like term with anything, but that negative 5m and the 16m are like terms because they have the same last name. And so let's combine. So the 40m squared is just going to come over. Negative 5 plus 16, the way you can think about this is essentially 16 minus 5. So that gives me positive 11m. And then that negative 2 doesn't have anything to combine with, so it just comes over. And then it goes highest degree to lowest degree, so it's in standard form. Okay? And so what you are doing is distributing each term, and because there's two things that we've been distributing, that's called double distributing, okay? And so you might hear some people call it double distribute, okay? So what about this one? All right, well, there's nothing between the parentheses, so that means we're multiplying, okay? So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take each one of these terms times each one of these separately, okay? And so this is a little bit more involved because we'll have to do a little bit more in terms of thinking, but if you know your exponent rules, it'll be fine. So we're going to start with this term right here. We've got a negative 3y squared, and we're going to distribute that times the 2y, and then we're going to take it times the negative 3. So if it's a harder one to do, remember you can always go to the side. So like negative 3y squared times the 2y, you could just write it out and then think through it. So negative 3 times 2 would end up being negative 6. And then y squared times y Well, remember that's like a y to the first right there, and when you're multiplying like bases, you add the exponents, so that would end up being y to the third. Okay, so when we take this times the 2y, we end up getting negative 6y to the third. And then we take the negative 3y squared times the negative 3. So again, if you need to go to the side and write it, you can. And notice that that 3 has a negative in front of it, so make sure you don't forget about it or forget to write it. So negative 3 times negative 3 ends up being a positive 9. And then that y squared doesn't have anything to multiply with, so it just comes over. Okay, so that is what we got when we distributed it times this. Okay, so this is what we got. So now we take the 1. So we're going to take the 1 times the 2y, and then the 1 times the negative 3. So 1 times 2y is pretty easy. You just get 2y. And then 1 times negative 3 ends up being negative 3. Okay, so from there, see if you have like terms, and if you do, combine them. If not, then just make sure it's in standard form. So do we have any like terms? Notice this one's a little different than the other ones because none of these are like terms. So from there, that just means you can't combine anything. So just make sure it's in standard form. So notice it does go highest degree to lowest because the degree of this one's 3. That one has a degree of 2, that one has a degree of 1, and then remember if it doesn't have a variable with it, with an exponent, that means it technically has a degree of 0, okay? And so that's as far as you can go. So that is your answer. Okay, so the last thing we're going to talk about with multiplying binomials in general before we actually start simplifying is what happens when you're given something like this. Well, you're going to have to remember what it means to have an exponent with it. So one thing that you have to remember when you have something in parentheses squared is, well, think about what it means to actually square something. Like, for instance, if you had just a number squared, what if you had like 5 squared? Well, what that actually is saying is that is how many times you take this times itself. So 5 squared would technically be 5 times itself 2 times, okay? So one way to do it is you could write it out times itself twice and then figure it out. So 5 times 5 would end up being 25. And so think about that in relation to this. So if you have something squared, what this actually means is you are taking this times itself that many times, okay? If you just distribute that square, you're going to make a mistake because that's not actually how it works, okay? And so you actually have to write it out when you see something like this. So this means that you're going to take the x plus 3 times itself, so you write it out twice. That's how many times you multiply it times itself, okay? So make sure that you remember to write it out, because if you don't and you just distribute that square, you're going to notice you will not end up with the same answer as when we do it this way, okay? So from there, it's going to be just like the problems that we did, okay? So you take each one of these terms, distribute it to everything in the other one. So we're going to start with the x, so it's going to be x times x. And then we're going to take the x times the 3. So x times x, we get x squared. X times 3, we get plus 3x. Now we take this times everything in the other one. So we take the 3 times the x and then the 3 times the 3. So 3 times x gives me a positive 3x. And then 3 times 3 gives me a positive 9. Okay? Then from there, if you have like terms, you combine them, and we do. So this 3x and that 3x will combine. So bring over my x squared. 3x plus 3x ends up being plus 6x, and then that plus 9 comes over. So there we go. And there's my answer. So with this one, notice it's the same story. We've got something squared. So the first thing that you should do is write it out. So this is how many times we take that times itself. So I'm going to write it out, 2x minus 1 times itself 2 times, okay? Then you distribute. So start with my 2x, so it'd be 2x times 2x, and then 2x times negative 1. So 2x times 2x gives me 4x squared. 2x times negative 1 is negative 2x. Now I'm done with my 2x, so now I go to my -1. So -1 times 2x, and then -1 times -1. -1 times 2x gives me -2x. And then -1 times -1, negative times a negative is a positive, and then 1 times 1 is 1. And then, do I have any like terms? I do. Those two are like terms, so I'm going to combine them. And then everything else doesn't have a like term, so it's just going to come over. So my 4x squared will come over. And then -2x minus 2x would be minus 4x. And then my plus 1 comes over. And then nothing else is a like term. It's already going from highest degree to lowest degree, and so I'm done. That is how you multiply binomials.